Continuing our reading in Abraham Hannibal and the Raiders of the Sands by Francis Summers Cox. This is chapter 8, Caravans, and the date is October in the year 1702. The big rains were well and truly over now. The rivers were getting lower, and even from up on St. Mary's Hill, Abraham could see a buzz down in the town. That long road that snaked northeast from the seacoast had been empty for months, but now that the highlands were drying out, caravans of donkeys and mules could be seen, making their way inland from the sea. And one day, from up on the hilltop, Abraham even saw the first caravan of the season crawling toward Dubarwa from the south, on its way through to the coast. The marketplaces and the warehouses were jumping. And not only on Saturday market day. Abraham and Lehiah loved the excitement and bustle of the marketplaces, the babble of different languages the traders spoke, the strange clothes they wore, the smell and the feel of the goods. As soon as they got the chance, they slipped down to see it all close up once more. As soon as they came down to the main track that led inland, they bumped into their first caravan, making its way up from the coast. Some 200 mules and donkeys, loaded with huge bundles and boxes, picking their way over the sharp rocks and shifting stones of the track. The traders had beards and light brown skins, and wore turbans or head cloths and full floor-length robes. Arabs, the children knew that, and even a few from faraway India. Abraham had been able to spend far more time in the town than Lehiah, and he had picked up a good bit of Arabic by now. So he chatted with them cheerfully in their language, with rapid translations for his sister's benefit. The Arabs in charge were riding mules, but not too fast, and the two children were able to jog alongside them. "Peace be with you." "And peace to you, little brother." "What do you have in your loads this time?" "These are here, and were carpets from Turkey, and rich velvet robes down the backs there, the cotton and silk from India. The boxes up ahead are guns from Holland." The strange foreign names meant nothing to Abraham. He had never seen a map, but he loved the sound of them. There was a magic in them, an excitement, even a kind of promise. "What are those really big boxes?" "Mirrors from Venice, where your sister's beads come from." "Mirrors?" Abraham had only ever seen one mirror, a small one that had been his unfavorite stepmother's. He couldn't imagine a mirror as big as he was. He fingered Lehiah's necklace and explained to her, "That's from Venice." He turned back to the merchants and asked, "Who is all this for?" "Some things are for selling to anyone who will buy, but some are for your emperor." "In Gondar? You're going to Gondar?" "That's right, little brother. Many's the load I've brought to the castles there." "I'd like to go to Gondar one day." "If you go much further with us, you'll be in Gondar," laughed the merchant. It was true. They were quite a long way from town already, well ahead of the donkeys who moved at the pace they chose, and well ahead of the donkey drivers who moved at the pace the donkeys chose. "We'll leave you now. Peace be with you all, and a safe journey," called Abraham. The two children turned round and walked slowly back to the town, getting their breath back. "The Queen of Sheba must have come with a caravan like that one," said Abraham thoughtfully, "except she had camels instead of donkeys, camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones, the Bible says." "And she was going the other way," pointed out Lehiah. "I mean, toward Jerusalem, not away from it. Even I can work that out, silly." But Abraham was daydreaming about somewhere nearer than Jerusalem. Gondar, that's the city in Granny Esther's stories, the city where she grew up. Imagine castles full of paintings and precious stones and 44 churches full of gold. Gondar's where the emperor lives, the conquering lion of Judah, the descendant of King Solomon, and he's guarded by real lions, just like Nimrod, only bigger. One day I'll go there, said Abraham suddenly. Where? Jerusalem? Maybe there too, but I meant Gondar. Why not? If you want to do something badly enough and don't give up, you will do it in the end. The most exciting part of Debarah was the lower town where the Muslims lived and traded. Here, half a dozen little stores had their wares spilling out in front of them, and the children could ruffle the piles of shiny rainbow-colored silks, try out the embroidered slippers and the tasseled umbrellas. Everyone knew whose children they were. Peace be with you, children. Who goes up with it up on the hill? Came a cheerful shout. It was Kemal, a young Arab merchant who ran a store selling all kinds of beads and ornaments. What's all this I hear about a pet lion up there? You fancy yourself as the emperor then, do you? With your own lion roaming around your palace? Abraham grinned and ran his fingers through the heaps of gleaming, clinking glass beads. He wasn't my idea. My father gave him to me. But he's the best thing ever. Very fierce. You'd be terrified. Kamal ignored that and smiled at Lahia. We don't see you down here that often, little lady. Choose yourself some beads. Lahia turned to Abraham, confused. What's he saying, Abraham? Abraham explained, and Lahia spent ages picking out 5 large, clear, blue beads with swirling yellow and red patterns inside them. Kamal strung them on a leather string and put them round her neck, and Abraham taught her how to say thank you in Arabic. The children moved on. The Muslim merchants sold more everyday goods, too, here and in the markets, and the air was full of the smell of coffee, spices, musk and wax and honey, cowhides and fleecy sheepskins. There were the gray blocks of salt that were used for money as well as for food, and heaps of grain and dried beans. Then the children wandered to the upper part of the town, toward the Mereb River, where the Christians lived, and the goldsmiths and silversmiths had their workshops, where a bridegroom could buy a gold necklace for his bride, parents a little silver cross for their baby, or a church a huge silver one for its processions. The children made their way to one particular gift shop. Sitting working on a pair of gold earrings was a small, round, white man. Greetings, Yanni, called the children. Yanni the Greek jumped. Oh, don't do that, children. When I'm deep in work, it's not good for my heart. Will you have some lemonade? Soon they were all sitting in Yanni's rich, bright carpets. He always refused to call them Turkish carpets. In his living room, drinking freshly squeezed lemon juice with sugar, something they never had anywhere else. Yanni had lived here nearly all of his life and spoke the language well. Abraham had seen 3 or 4 other white men in his time, but Yanni was the only one he really knew. I can tell you, children, your father's country is a fine one for a Christian. Where I come from, the Turks never give us a moment's peace. New taxes every day, new rules and regulations about what you can and can't wear. Churches all turned into mosques. It was the day a Turkish soldier insulted my sister that I had to leave. I didn't have a weapon at the time, or I'd have had the man's blood on my conscience forever. But I punched him in the face so hard, half his teeth fell out. I escaped to a little fishing boat, got all the way to Africa, to Alexandria. Of course, I was younger and fitter then. Abraham tried to avoid meeting Lahia's eye. Every time he met Yanni, he'd been told a different version of this story, and by now he didn't believe any of them. When Lahia couldn't come to town with him, he used to report back to her the version he'd just been told, and they would take turns acting Yanni, telling the story until they collapsed into giggles. But he was a kind old man and friendly, and they never teased him to his face. At last, they couldn't put off going home any longer. As they crossed the town, a caravan came plodding through from up country, ready to rest for the night. The children could see the great tusks of ivory strapped one on each side of the weary donkeys, the sacks of grain and skins of butter and honey, the locked chests of gold, all on their way to the seacoast in 100 different destinations. In silence, peeking round the corner of a warehouse, Abraham and Lahia watched another part of the caravan that was not on donkey back, but was making its own way to the seacoast. About 4 dozen children, a dozen young women, and a few men, their hands chained in front of them, filed into the marketplace and slumped down on the ground to rest. By the look of them, their clothes and their hair and their faces, they came from all kinds of different lands. The merchants, some Arabs and some local men, stood guard with guns, but the slaves didn't look inclined to escape. They just looked bewildered, miserable, and very tired. "From the wild lands mostly, I think," whispered Lahia. "Maybe some of them speak our secret language." In the language of the Kunama, the children whispered greetings to the slaves, and some of the limp figures raised their heads in curiosity, but it was no use. One of the guards heard them too, and was next to them in a few quick strides, beating them away with the barrel of his musket and screaming, "Scat! Get lost, kids! Unless you'd like to join your brothers and sisters on this trip!" The children fled and didn't stop till they were halfway up St. Mary's Hill. "That really was scary," panted Lahia. I think he meant it, don't you?" "I think so," gasped Abraham in reply. "But the other Arabs earlier on were so friendly, and so were the Arabs in town." "Well, we have been warned before," said Lahia. "As Granny Esther says, mind how you go and mind out for kidnappers. Just because someone's a Christian or even a child of a chief doesn't mean they can't be kidnapped. Anyone can end up a slave." It was a relief to get back even to the depressing atmosphere of the royal compound. And later that night, after Abraham and his sister had settled themselves for sleep on their cowskins on the hut floor, he heard her softly call him. "Abraham?" "Yes?" "Have you ever thought that if Father hadn't loved Mother so much, she'd have been sold, just like those slave people today? She could have been marched off to the sea in a caravan just like that." "And so would we." "There wouldn't have been any of us, silly. We would never have been born." Abraham thought about it for a moment. It was a disturbing idea. "I'm glad you were born, Lahia. I like having you as a sister." Lahia laughed. "Yes, you are lucky, aren't you? But then, I think I'm lucky too." That's the end of chapter 8.